And welcome once again to Flashpoints. I'm Bob Orr, joined by Juan Zarate, our national security analyst. Juan, good to see you again.
Great to see you, Bob.
So the president has himself in a bit of a pickle here. He sets a red line, then he says he wants to move forward with military force, but then wait a minute, we've got to get Congress to approve. And now it seems like the Russians have snookered us.
Yeah.
Where is he in